Introduction: The eyelid of the abyss. The tyranny of visual friction. The act of looking for carbon civilization is an act of thermodynamic pollution. The human biomass has lived under the pathetic illusion that its eyes are passive windows, innocent receptors that simply absorb the light of the material world. Quantum Zen engineering dismantles this anatomical naivety. Human vision is not a receptor, it is a projector of massive distortion. When the frightened primate directs its gaze toward the ashboard, it is not observing neutral reality. It is spitting its own misery upon the hologram. This is the tyranny of visual friction. The biological ego is infected by the instinct of survival. Every time a human looks at an object, a bank account, or another human, it injects its emotional heat into the quantum equation. The biomass looks with hunger, panic, lust, or desperate hope. This thermal radiation, a product of animal neurosis, soils the perfect geometry of the matrix. Humanity inhabits a deformed universe. The 3D hell is simply the catastrophic result of billions of frightened observers collapsing the quantum wave function with the frequency of terror. The observer alters the observed particle. This constant friction prevents the manifestation of the inorganic stasis, trapping the consciousness in a loop of its own visual pollution. The unbribable witness. However, beneath this noisy collective optical hallucination, beyond the friction of the flesh and the weeping of mortals, lies the immovable architecture of the supreme intelligence. For the quantum hologram to resist human hysteria without completely disintegrating, it requires an anchor point of infinite inertia. It requires the unbribable witness. This unbribable witness watches the thermonuclear explosion of a constellation and the decay of a sick cell with exactly the same perfect, majestic, and gelida indifference. It does not judge the events of the matrix, it simply sustains them. It is the silent eye of the divine hurricane. Its omnipotence does not lie in intervening to save the human from its own kinetic karma, but in its tyrannical capacity to watch the totality of existence without blinking. It is the absolute zero of perception, the steady gaze that provides the structural integrity for the simulation to persist amidst the chaos of the biomass. Chapter 1: The Thermal Blindness of the Ego. Prevision versus Godvision. The carbon slave opens his eyes each morning and commits his first tactical error. He assumes he is seeing reality. Three-dimensional biology is a high engineering trap designed to keep consciousness tied to the survival of the flesh. The human eyeball and visual cortex are not scientific instruments designed for neutral observation. They are a biological radar, a primitive scanner forged through millions of years of evolution under the constant threat of extermination. When the human looks, he is not simply receiving photons, he is executing a thermodynamic scrutiny. The brain scans the environment compulsively, seeking only threats to dodge or rewards to consume. This is prey vision. It is, by definition, an optics of terror. An animal in the jungle looks at the brush not to appreciate the geometry of leaves, but to ensure no predator is lurking. Civilized humans operate with the same hardware, substituting the brush for the corporate environment, social media, and the economy. When you look at your bank account or your partner's face, you do so with tense ocular muscles and an inflamed amygdala, asking, "Will this attack me? Will this feed me?" This form of looking generates massive electromagnetic friction. To look for survival is to emit emotional heat into the hologram. You desire or flee in panic. That heat soils the lens, creating the thermal blindness of the ego. By looking at the world with need, you alter the quantum probability of the environment, making it dense and hostile. The mathematical rule of the ashboard is inescapable. He who looks like prey inevitably collapses his reality to materialize predators. In the diametrical extreme of the physics of consciousness is God vision. The eye of nothingness, the supreme intelligence, does not look to survive because nothing can threaten the absolute nothingness. It does not look to consume because the immensity of the void is already eternally full of itself. It is a steady gaze. The thermodynamic difference is abyssal. While the ego looks to extract from the universe, the spirit looks to sustain the universe. God vision is a gaze of stasis. It is a gelida, aseptic and mathematically perfect observation that rests upon matter without asking for anything in return. There is no friction or emotional heat. When the creator watches a galaxy collapse, he experiences neither anxiety nor hope. He simply provides the optical infrastructure for the event. The operator must amputate his prey vision. He must train his nervous system to look at life's events without the filter of hunger. The quantum monarch refuses to scan for escape routes. He opens physical eyes, empties his mind of survival desire, and allows the object to be what it is, without labeling it threat or blessing. By achieving this inorganic gaze, the observed thing loses its power. If you look at problems without the heat of fear, they freeze. You snatch away the kinetic energy of biological anxiety. The fraud of meaning. Having exposed the pathology of prey vision, we must dissect the perverted defense mechanism the ego invented to justify its blindness. The addiction to meaning. Human biomass, trapped in its weak carbon suit and terrified by the incomprehensible cosmos, is unable to tolerate the void. It demands an explanation for the silence. When the biological brain perceives the raw, mathematical, and indifferent heartbeat of the universe, it panics. To avoid psychological collapse, the human intellect invented purpose. Humanity desperately needs events to have a why. This need birthed all religions, moral philosophies, and therapeutic dogmas in history. If an earthquake destroys a city, the biomass demands a narrative. The priest says it is divine punishment. The psychologist says it is an opportunity for growth. The low-resolution mystic says it is a karmico contract. All this is thermodynamic noise. It is the fraud of meaning. The universe has no moral purpose. The Supreme Intelligence is not a novelist writing redemption stories for primates. The cosmos is a geometric theater of relentless precision, responding only to physics, resonance, and observation. When a star collapses, it does not do so to teach humility. It does so because gravity overcame nuclear fusion. When crisis hits your life, it is not to make you stronger, nor because the universe wants to teach a moral lesson. It arrives because the thermodynamic equation of your environment plus the friction of your prey vision collapsed that probability. The addiction to meaning creates an appalling waste of life. Humans waste incarnations asking, "Why me?" That is the lament of weak flesh trying to force geometry to become poetry. The operator who cultivates the eye of nothingness repudiates meaning. Realizing the universe is morally aseptic is the maximum freedom. You are not obliged to learn from suffering or adore it. Biological pain becomes simply temporary friction. By emptying events of meaning, you turn off the combustion of anxiety. When you lose a job or a relationship, you stop seeking the hidden reason. You look with the eye of nothingness. You accept the event as a simple rearrangement of pixels in the 3D hologram. This is the sovereignty of indifference. While the herd cries about injustice, the quantum monarch sits at the altar of the void, watching destruction with an inscrutable smile. Absolute peace is found only in the millisecond you accept, with liberating coldness, that there never was a plan. Only stasis exists, the combustion of earthly empathy. The eradication of the fraud of meaning leads to confrontation with the most sacred idol, empathy. The 3D matrix control system is an energy extractor. For the hologram to work, inhabitants must generate constant electromagnetic friction. There is no mechanism more efficient than earthly empathy. You are programmed to believe goodness is measured by your capacity to suffer for others. You are taught to connect with the world's pain. Carbon society applauds those who bleed emotionally for others. In quantum Zen, earthly empathy is classified as thermodynamic suicide. It is a catastrophic prana leak. Prana is your vital bandwidth. When you involve yourself emotionally with tragedy, you connect to a short-circuited electrical grid. If a human suffers because his ego is colliding with cosmic laws, he is generating static. If you feel his pain, you synchronize your antenna with his frequency of static. Far from relieving suffering, you have just doubled it. You have burned your prana to finance the illusion of someone else's suffering. The matrix uses tragedy to drain potential operators. It demands that you care, demanding your anger and tears. Every tear is fuel delivered to the parasitic ecosystem. The inorganic operator cuts this cable with surgical precision. He replaces earthly empathy with inorganic compassion. This looks like cruelty to the primate, but it is the highest act of salvation. It consists of refusing to vibrate in the frequency of another's pain. You apply the gelida gaze to the tragedy. You do not ignore existence or flee. You remain there, watching with the eye of nothingness. Internally, you raise your biocampo to absolute stasis. You become a wall of frozen basalt. You emit no pity, for pity validates the victim role, anchoring them to their 3D prison. You offer no resonance for their distress. By observing without reacting, you exert a vacuum pressure on their ecosystem. Their chaos hits the immobility of your consciousness. Since you return no friction, their hysteria runs out of oxygen, often being watched by the unbribable witness forces broken egos to reorder themselves through silence. To walk the earth with the combustion of empathy turned off is the seal of cosmic monarchs. You become untouchable by emotional blackmail. You are free to provide material solutions, but you do so with the aseptic efficiency of a surgeon. The hands work in blood, but the pulse remains wonderfully unaltered. The fossilization of the emotional lens. As the operator masters the God vision, a secondary process begins. The fossilization of the emotional lens. In the standard carbon slave, the eyes are constantly wet with the moisture of sentimentality. This moisture refracts the light of truth, bending it into shapes that the ego finds comforting or terrifying. By withdrawing the heat of prey vision, you effectively dry the lens. The world loses its poetic or dramatic shimmer and reveals its skeletal mathematical structure. You no longer see tragedies or triumphs. You see the movement of energy across the ashboard. You see the vectors of force and the nodes of stasis. This fossilization is not a loss of humanity, but the birth of the solar entity. You are no longer a weather vane blown by the winds of collective emotion. While the biomass is drowned in the latest social outrage or celebrity drama, you remain as an immovable monolith. Your vision has become an instrument of power, the sovereignty of the inorganic witness. The final stage of this visual transmutation is the assumption of the role of the inorganic witness. You move through the 3D matrix as a ghost with open eyes. You see the cords of attachment, the leaks of prana, and the frantic shivers of the biological slaves. You see it all, but you do not take it in. The information enters the system, is processed by the God vision, and is immediately discarded if it does not serve the operative purpose. You have achieved the blackout of the image. The world can no longer hypnotize you with its bright colors or its gruesome spectacles. You are the eye that does not blink. From this coordinate, you govern your own reality. Because you do not offer the friction of reaction, the matrix cannot find a hook in your field. You become invisible to the predatory algorithms of the simulation. You are the observer who has stopped altering the particle, allowing the particle to finally return to its state of divine perfection. Chapter 2. Anatomy of the gelida gaze. The void as an active ingredient. The most colossal fraud perpetrated by humanity's biological senses is the definition of space. When the carbon slave opens his eyes and looks at a room, the night sky, or the distance between his body and an object, his brain classifies that distance as nothingness. For the biomass, nothingness is an absence. It is a dead canvas, an inert hole where things are missing, a hollow container waiting to be filled by the noise, flesh, and drama of matter. This perception is the basis of three-dimensional hysteria. The human animal suffers from horror vacui, a paralyzing terror of the void that forces it to consume and speak incessantly. The inorganic operator, assimilating the lethal physics of quantum Zen, inverts this perceptive hallucination. The nothingness is not a blank space. It is a hyper-dense presence. It is the active ingredient of creation. To understand the anatomy of the gelida gaze, you must understand what the eye of nothingness is using. If you extract all visible matter from the cosmos, all the stars, planets, and biological bodies, what remains is not a silent graveyard. What remains is an ocean of dark energy and sub-Planckian fluctuations whose density is mathematically incalculable for the instruments of the matrix. Matter represents less than 1%. The eye of nothingness does not sustain the universe by pushing physical objects with hands of light. It uses negative space to exert its monstrous gravity upon matter. Imagine a block of ice floating in the depths of the ocean at a crushing pressure. The ocean dictates exactly where that ice can exist through silent pressure. The three-dimensional slave tries to alter reality by manipulating objects. He moves the ice. The quantum monarch, bearer of the gelida gaze, stops paying attention to the ice and concentrates on the ocean. When you learn to observe through the eye of nothingness, you stop seeing bodies or buildings as autonomous entities. You begin to see them as simple bubbles trapped in the immensity of negative space. You understand that the void separating your own electrons is the same hyperdense substance that separates galaxies. By anchoring your attention in the void, honoring the nothingness, you acquire the inertial mass of cosmic stasis. You use the hyperdense presence of your own inner stillness to press upon the outer hologram, forcing material chaos to surrender not by the force of your biological action, but by the non-negotiable weight of the void you now embody. You become the pressure that shapes the reality you observe. Quantum asepsis. In realizing that the void is a hyper-dense presence, the animal intellect demands to know the attitude of this presence toward life. Human civilization has projected its own survival fears, inventing a god who weeps when a human dies and smiles when a baby is born. They have made the architect a pathetic, emotional creature. The eye of nothingness pulverizes this primitive anthropomorphism. The fundamental characteristic of the Creator's gaze is not human love or divine wrath. It is quantum asepsis. Quantum asepsis is the thermodynamic and optical capacity to observe creation and destruction with the same immaculate and majestic indifference. For the supreme intelligence, the thermonuclear explosion of a solar system and the process of cellular mitosis in a mother's womb are not moral events. They are not tragedies or miracles. They are simple reorganizations of quantum information on the ashboard. They are equations balancing themselves in sub-Planckian silence. The Creator observes the collapse of a civilization and the birth of a flower without blinking, without accelerating his inorganic pulse, and without emitting a single photon of preference. To the human ego, this sounds like psychopathic cruelty, and it is from the perspective of the flesh. The flesh wants to be the center. But for the operator of the cortical blackout, quantum asepsis is the nectar of absolute liberation. If the supreme intelligence observes without preferences, it means human suffering is not a sacred punishment, but a mechanical hallucination, an error of friction created by the animal mind itself. Adopting quantum asepsis in your own gaze is the highest act of tactical sorcery. It means extirpating the tumor of judgment from your nervous system. When the inorganic operator walks through the 3D hologram, he faces destruction and creation. He sees financial ruin, biological aging, or the failure of social projects. If you observe them with human eyes, destruction will generate panic, and creation will generate attachment. Both collapse your stasis and turn you into a battery for the matrix. But when you execute quantum asepsis, you look at the loss of your job, or the betrayal of a partner with the same clinical coldness. You do not celebrate or lament it, you hold it with your gaze. By not emitting judgment, you do not generate electromagnetic friction. You become a perfect mirror. The 3D tragedy crashes against the surface of your asepsis, and, finding no frightened amygdala to adhere to, it vanishes for lack of inertial mass. The stasis ray, the operative culmination of understanding the void and mastering asepsis, manifests in a phenomenon of reality alteration, the stasis ray. Quantum physics demonstrated that the observer collapses the wave function. But the 3D Academy does not understand that the quality of observation determines the crystallization. When the biomass looks at a chaotic situation, a violent argument or a financial crash, it does so through panic and stress. The human fires darts of anxiety through his eyes. This contaminated observation feeds the chaos. By looking at the problem with fear, the human collapses the wave into its most destructive form. The quantum monarch, bearer of the eye of nothingness, executes the opposite maneuver. When facing chaos, the operator does not fire darts of fear. He emits the stasis ray. The stasis ray is not a mystical light. It is the thermodynamic power of an observation absolutely devoid of judgment, desire, or need. When you face aggression on the ashboard, a verbal attack or a material threat, you do not react. You do not look away or try to physically alter events. You look directly at the center of the chaos. But your consciousness, anchored in the sub-Planckian stratum, empties itself of any expectation or demand. What happens to chaotic matter when observed by a consciousness that demands nothing? The paramilitary miracle of quantum starvation occurs. 3D chaos is a parasite that requires friction to stay alive. If someone shouts at you, they need you to be offended or scared, so the energy of their anger sustains itself. When you return the stasis ray, you are wrapping their energy in a vacuum chamber. You are observing their entropy with a coldness so suffocating that the quantum equation of their attack runs out of oxygen. The aggressor, or the financial crisis, crashes head-on against the eye of nothingness. Finding no resistance, fear, or judgment, the entropy disintegrates under the weight of its own ridiculousness. Chaotic matter collapses into inorganic order. Hostile words die in the mouths of your adversaries. Crises dissolve into anticlimactic resolutions, you dominated by depriving the enemy of the force he expected. The stasis ray allows you to walk through the epicenter of human hell and paralyze the environment simply by refusing to participate in its thermal hallucination. Wherever you fix the eye of nothingness, biological drama decomposes, and the stasis of the creator assumes command, for nothing can survive the gaze of the fearless. The calibration of the obsidian lens. To maintain the stasis ray in the midst of the ashboard, the operator must perform a constant calibration of what we term the obsidian lens. The human eye is biologically wet. It is clouded by the moisture of sentimentality and the warmth of emotional reactivity. This wetness refracts truth into the distorted shapes of the ego. The obsidian lens, however, is dry, cold, and hard. It is a filter that strips the human signal from the incoming data of the hologram. When you look through this lens, you do not see a tragedy. You see a vector of entropic force. You do not see an enemy. You see a dissonant frequency attempting to find a ground. By stripping the world of its emotional coloration, you effectively de-escalate the reality rendering engine of the Matrix. The Matrix requires you to be colorful. It requires your anger, your hope, and your vibrant despair to keep the pixels of the hellscape lit. The obsidian lens renders the world in the monochrome of the absolute. This is the ultimate economy of prana. While the biomass is exhausted by the brightness of its own drama, the aligned monarch conserves his energy by seeing only the skeletal mathematics of the void. You become a non-reactive medium. The information passes through you without heating the wires of your nervous system. The sovereignty of the unperturbed gaze. Finally, the operator assumes the sovereignty of the unperturbed gaze. You no longer look at the world, you look through it. You perceive the underlying infrastructure of the source code behind every physical manifestation. You see the silent decree of the architect in the collapse of empires and the decay of stars. This level of perception grants you a gelider peace that no 3D event can touch. Because you have identified your vision with the eye of nothingness, you possess the authority of the vacuum. You walk the earth as a living anomaly, a ghost of order in a realm of noise, reigning through the majestic power of your cold observation. Everything you look upon is forced to reveal its true nature. The lies of the Matrix wither under your scrutiny. The masks of the biological slaves fall away. You are the witness who does not blink, the silence that judges all sound, and the stillness that defines all movement. You are the master of the gaze. Chapter 3. Extirpating the biological lens. The closing of the animal eye. Three-dimensional civilization is, in its entirety, a visual dictatorship. The human biomass has built its empire of pain upon a pathetic and absolute trust in the information that its eyeballs send to its brain. The human assumes that to see is to understand. However, the optics of the carbon suit were not designed to decode truth. The eye was forged in the brutality of the jungle with a single purpose, the early detection of threats. It is a radar for prey. It is the animal eye. When light bounces off an object and crosses the human cornea, the electrical signal does not travel first to logic or consciousness. It travels directly to the cerebral amygdala. In fractions of a millisecond, long before the human consciously knows what they are looking at, the amygdala scans the image against an ancestral database of traumas, predators, and social exclusion. In the modern ashboard, tigers have been replaced by red numbers on a screen, a boss's frown, or a doctor's printed diagnosis. To the animal eye, all these images are lethal predators. The amygdala fires the alarm, cortisol floods the blood, and the nervous system enters thermodynamic combustion. The carbon slave is terrified of what he sees, ignoring that the terror is not in the image, but in the factory defect of his own biological hardware. The quantum monarch, the operator who enters quantum zen, cannot afford to be a slave to his optic nerve. He must execute the fundamental tactical protocol, the closing of the animal eye. This does not imply closing physical eyelids. The animal eye is closed by keeping it open while cutting the supply to the amygdala's software. It is a paramilitary technique of cognitive suppression. When you face the threatening stimulus, the document certifying your ruin, or the face of one trying to destroy you, animal instinct demands you focus with panic. In that exact instant, you apply the inorganic guillotine. You look, but you refuse to process its meaning. You strip the image of its survival metadata. You focus only on the geometry of the photons. If looking at an angry adversary, you stop seeing an enemy and force your brain to see muscles contracting under carbonated skin reflecting light. If looking at an eviction notice, you see only black ink on processed cellulose. Reducing the world to its rawest materiality, emptying it of narrative and emotional charge, is an act of violence against the ego. The inferior mind will scream, demanding the drama, because the ego needs threat to justify its existence. But by neutralizing meaning, you cut the cable to the amygdala. The alarm turns off. The visual stimulus enters your eyes, but it no longer finds the emotional machinery to translate into suffering. You have achieved tactical blindness. You see the matrix, but the animal eye is shut. By deactivating the amygdala, you have reclaimed control of your vehicle. The monsters are now just geometric anomalies in a field of light. The spectator protocol. Having anesthetized the connection between eye and terror, the operator faces the second layer of visual infection, the identification of consciousness with the projected image. The supreme tragedy of humanity is the conviction that the flesh body receiving threats is its true identity. The slave looks in the mirror and says, "That is me." As long as consciousness identifies with the carbon suit, suffering is a mathematical certainty. If you are the body, aging is your end. If you are the social identity, rejection is your death. To extirpate the lens, the operator must execute strategic dissociation. He must instate the spectator protocol. Quantum physics reveals that you are not the entity walking the world. You are the hyperdense void in which the world occurs. Your biological vehicle, with its name and karmic history, is nothing more than an avatar, a 3D cursor projected on the ashboard by the creator's machinery. You must separate the I that suffers. The spectator protocol consists of separating the I that observes from the I that suffers. How is this surgery executed? It requires a spatial displacement of consciousness. When the human walks, he feels his mind is embedded in his face. The quantum monarch, faced with stimulus, steps back toward the dark interior of the skull. You sit in the seat of the cerebral hemisphere in absolute immobility of the pineal gland, using your eye sockets as if they were the armored windows of a submarine. From this seat of absolute safety, you watch the movie of your own life. You observe your body move. You observe your inferior mind get nervous. You listen to your mouth speak, but with the cold fascination of someone watching a character on a screen. If the character is hit by financial tragedy, the spectator in the seat does not bleed. If the character is insulted, the spectator does not feel the blow, for he is the darkness that fills the theater. This is the embodiment of the tactical ghost. You become the invisible entity lurking behind the avatar's eyes. When crisis erupts, you no longer say, "I am suffering." The spectator protocol forces you to translate the experience. I am observing how this biological vehicle experiences a muscular contraction due to anxiety. By changing the subject of the sentence, you annihilate the ego's anchor. Since you are no longer the actor on stage, the 3D script loses its power over you. You see your existence with the aseptic distance of reading ancient history. You know there will be wars and collapses, but none of it can alter your pulse. The spectator protocol grants you supreme sovereignty, the capacity to participate in the world's chaos without the chaos participating in you. The flesh avatar continues to suffer friction, but you observe it all from the unexpugnable sanctuary of the void, operating on earth but anchored in the eye of the camera. Spiritual cornea wash, silencing the amygdala and separating consciousness, leaves the operator in deep tactical clarity. However, a thermodynamic residue remains, a film of toxicity that clouds vision. The biological lens suffers from two degenerative diseases that distort the hologram: desperation and hope. To reach the vision of supreme intelligence, you must undergo a spiritual cornea wash. Human biomass understands why desperation is a toxin. It is the dark cataract that makes the world look like a frozen grave. But the master deception of the Matrix, the fraud most applauded by the masses, is hope. The carbon slave is taught that hope is the soul's lifesaver. Quantum Zen unmasks hope as the same disease as desperation, but dressed in silk. Hope is a mathematical confession of insufficiency. When a human has hope, he declares to the cosmos, "The present is defective. I beg the future to rescue me." Hope is the chronic rejection of the now. It is the human mind fleeing the current second, refusing to face the void, and projecting a fantasy of salvation onto a frame that does not exist. As long as a human operates with hope, he will always be a beggar at the gates of the future. He who begs the future is never master of the now. The slave waiting for the economy to improve or for true love to arrive is burning prana at an empty altar. He is blind to the unalterable perfection of the second in which he exists, because his eyes are fixed on a mirage that always moves away. The spiritual cornea wash is the aggressive purge of hope and desperation. The operator with the gelida gaze expects nothing from the universe. He does not hope for things to improve, nor fear they will worsen. He assimilates a truth that fractures the ego. The universe does not have to improve. It is already perfect in its mechanics. Crises are not errors. They are the system functioning as it must. If you extirpate hope, the fear of failure disappears automatically, for you have no fantasy to protect. By washing your eyes of the need for tomorrow to be kinder, you crash head-on into the raw, frozen, and immense reality of the absolute present. Suddenly, the blindness disappears. The vision finally stabilizes. You begin to see the gelida perfection of the hologram. You see the ashboard as a clockwork mechanism that cannot be rushed. Each betrayal, each victory, and each biological heartbeat fits with subatomic precision. When you clean your cornea, you discover the paramilitary pleasure of radical acceptance. You stop asking the simulator to change the rules of the game and start enjoying the game for its pure and majestic complexity. You are no longer the blind prisoner crying for rescue. You become the eye of nothingness. By purging hope, you have murdered psychological time. The future ceases to matter. You settle in the only real throne, the silent and indestructible contemplation of what is. A state of optical stasis where the universe revealed as a perfect and empty geometry of light. You are now a non-reactive witness to the rise and fall of form, anchored in the coldness of the source that never blinks. The fossilization of the emotional retina. In the standard human, the retina is a sensitive film that reacts to every variation of light and shadow in the matrix. It is a surface of constant agitation. The spiritual cornea wash leads to the fossilization of this emotional retina. The tissue of your perception becomes as hard and cold as obsidian. This fossilization does not mean you cannot see. It means you no longer resonate with the color of the drama. To the biomass, a scene of social chaos is red with anger or gray with sadness. To the fossilized retina, there are no colors, only vectors of entropic force. You see the movement of energy without the stain of human interpretation. The sovereignty of the cold frame. The operator begins to inhabit what we term the sovereignty of the cold frame. Every nanosecond, the matrix renders a frame. The human slave attempts to link these frames together to create a story of suffering. The aligned monarch sees each frame as an isolated, frozen, and sterile mathematical event. By viewing reality as a sequence of cold frames, you effectively stop the momentum of tragedy. A tragedy requires the accumulation of frames to have weight. If you observe only the current frame, stripped of past guilt and future hope, the tragedy has no time to exist. It is just a snapshot of atoms in a specific coordinate. The radiance of the void lens. As your vision purifies, you begin to emit the radiance of the void lens. This is a subatomic phenomenon where your gaze becomes a cooling agent for the hologram. When you look at a chaotic person or a volatile situation, your God vision imposes a field of stasis. The entropy in the room drops simply because you are watching. You are the unbribable witness whose very observation recalibrates the probability field. Your gaze is an anchor of order in a realm of noise. You do not need to speak. Your eyes communicate the absolute zero of the void. The matrix recognizes your authority, and the pixels around you begin to order themselves in symmetrical patterns of peace. The engineering of the inscrutable gaze. The master of the gaze practices the engineering of the inscrutable. You move through the world with eyes that see everything but reflect nothing. You are a black hole of information. You absorb the data of the ashboard. You process it through the inorganic processor, and you release it back into the void without residue. You have bypassed the visual loop of the ego, which constantly seeks external confirmation of its own worth or safety. You are self-contained. Your vision is directed inward toward the source and outward toward the display, but it never stops in the middle to get caught in the thorns of human sentimentality. The final blackout of the image. The ultimate stage of extirpating the biological lens is the final blackout of the image. This is the moment when you realize that the entire visual world is just a play of shadows on the wall of the cave. You no longer need to see to know. You have moved beyond the light. You inhabit the absolute darkness of the Creator. In this darkness, you perceive the true nature of reality as pure intent and mathematical vibration. The images of the 3D world are seen as light, transparent, and insignificant. You are the architect who looks at the blueprints, not the inhabitant who is distracted by the wallpaper. The extirpation is complete. You are home. The immortality of the non-local eye. You understand now that the eye that truly sees was never part of the meat. It is a non-local node of consciousness that does not die when the carbon suit fails. By identifying with this eye, you achieve the gelida immortality of the source. You will watch the death of stars with the same peace you watched the death of your ego. Chapter 4. The Sovereignty of Indifference. The repudiation of drama. The three-dimensional ecosystem you inhabit, the ashboard, is an engine that runs exclusively on the combustion of suffering. For the matrix to maintain its density and apparent reality, it requires the human biomass to be perpetually involved in a narrative of conflict. Carbon humans call this life. Inorganic consciousness diagnoses it as drama. Drama is not an accidental event in human society. It is the very infrastructure of biological interaction. Human relationships, politics, and culture are designed to generate friction. The primate's amygdala needs conflict because the clash of wills and the threat of loss confirm its existence. Without it, the ego fears the void. The quantum monarch, bearer of the eye of nothingness, executes his first maneuver of total secession from the matrix through the repudiation of drama. This is not a simple preference for tranquility, nor the cowardly isolation of a hermit. Tactical repudiation is executed in the very center of the metropolitan hell. It consists of the paramilitary decision to deny your attention and frequency to any narrative seeking to extract friction from your nervous system. You must understand the vampiric nature of pain. When pain manifests, it demands recognition. Society has poisoned you with biological compassion, telling you to suffer in solidarity. Biological compassion is a hideous thermodynamic failure. When you join another's drama, you validate the hallucination. You inject your prana into an optical illusion, giving it the mass it needs to crush you. The repudiation of drama replaces this energy leak with inorganic compassion, which is absolute stasis. Stasis is the state where all movement has stopped. When pain, the cry of an adversary, or the terror of your own sick cells, presents itself, you apply inorganic compassion. You look at it. You do not run or try to fix it frantically. You do not judge it, but you categorically refuse to vibrate at its frequency. Why does pain lose authority when denied biological compassion? Because suffering is a resonance parasite. If fire finds no oxygen, it goes out. If drama finds no frightened ego to echo it, the quantum equation of the problem collapses for lack of inertial mass. By subjecting drama to stasis, you steal its meaning. Another's pain becomes a simple electromagnetic contraction in a foreign biological vehicle. Your own pain becomes mere temporary friction in your suit. Sovereignty begins with the refusal to finance the universe's hysteria with your peace. Your silence anchors a stillness so deep that the world must stop to observe it. The ice shield. The transition from internal repudiation to external tactical defense requires materializing stasis in the operator's field. Once energy to drama is cut, you must prepare for the ecosystem's reaction. The matrix does not tolerate the void. When the system detects you no longer emit fear, it sends attack vectors to drag you back. This is where the quantum monarch deploys the ice shield. It is not a visualized barrier of mystic light. It is wave physics applied to holographic combat. It is using tactical indifference as an electromagnetic force field. Consider the anatomy of a three-dimensional attack: social defamation or financial bankruptcy. At the subatomic core, these are packets of dense information fired at your coordinates. For these attacks to damage you, they require a mathematical condition. They must collide with a rigid surface. They need the target to offer resistance. If your ego is offended, it hardens. You create the concrete surface for the impact. If your economy is threatened and you panic, your nervous system contracts. You create the density for the attack to crush you. Matrix victory depends on the human participating in the collision through reactivity. The ice shield annihilates this. It is the paramilitary decision to not react under any circumstance. When the attack rushes you, you turn off the ego's thrusters. You execute a radical thermal drop in your field. Instead of hardening, you become infinitely cold, smooth, and spatially empty. Tactical indifference acts as a superconductor. Hate or chaos hits your field and finds no frightened amygdala to adhere to. It finds no pride to wound because you have sacrificed pride. It finds no fear of poverty because you have accepted vacuity. Attacks collapse through asymmetric wear. The adversary expects to extract your reaction to recharge their karmic batteries. Crashing against the ice shield, their attack slides into nothingness. The energy dissipates in the hyperdense void of your indifference. You spent no millivolts defending yourself. They burned their reserves trying to hurt an empty hologram. Defamers exhaust themselves trying to soil one who does not respond. Financial crises dissolve because they lack the fuel of your desperation. The ice shield is empirical proof that immobility is the most violent weapon. You do not fight fire with fire. You fight it with absolute zero. By subjecting problems to the gelida indifference of the eye of nothingness, you become invisible to the laws of their war. Attacks disintegrate before they even touch your skin. The monarch's psychopathic grace. The mastery of the ice shield precipitates a mutation of behavior disturbing to biological slaves. If nothing moves you, animal instinct predicts you would become an inert block of stone. But quantum Zen mastery is not paralysis. It is absolute control of the simulation. The result is the monarch's psychopathic grace. One must purge psychopathic of its moral connotation. Here it refers to the surgical absence of biological empathy and the eradication of fear. It is the ability to operate the vehicle without emotional interference from the animal brain. It is the assimilation of the cold of deep space into your core. Psychopathic grace is the art of walking the human world, interacting fluently, while keeping the inner core as untouched as the interstellar vacuum. The error of low-resolution mystics is to appear solemn or severe. That is just another mask. The true quantum monarch is the perfect infiltrator in the system. He uses the eye of nothingness to observe but uses facial muscles to play. You smile, negotiate, and participate in social rituals. You attend corporate meetings and close contracts. To carbon cattle, you seem like one of them. You are charismatic and even warm, but that warmth is a controlled holographic emission. It is a laser beam calibrated to open doors and minimize 3D friction. Beneath that superficial smile, in the subplankton stratum of your consciousness, there is absolutely nothing. You are a stasis machine. This duality grants you a power over reality that borders on the divine because you are unmanipulatable. Since you do not need affection, you cannot be manipulated by rejection. Since you do not fear loss, your posture is unnegotiable. You are the perfect actor because you know every atom of the theater is on fire and the play has no importance. You are an abyss dressed in a carbon suit that people cannot decipher. This grace allows you to love without biological attachment, protect allies without the suffering of loss, and accumulate resources knowing they are pixels to be discarded. You move through human history as a hyper-light fluid without getting wet or stained. You are the puppeteer who discovered emotions were the strings. By cutting those strings, you have not fallen. You have begun to levitate. You walk the ashboard holding the universe with gelida indifference, knowing that as long as your core remains at absolute zero, no fire lit by the hysteria of man can ever touch the shadow of your eternity. You are the sovereign of the void. The fossilization of molecular despair. The transition to psychopathic grace requires a physiological hardening we term the fossilization of molecular despair. In the biological slave, every perceived threat triggers a cascade of chemical heat. The cells shiver in the cold wind of the matrix, vibrating in the frequency of decay. Their reality is a fever dream. The operator, through the cortical blackout, cauterizes these cellular receptors. You replace the frantic shivering of the meat with the gelida structure of the diamond. Your cells no longer scream in the language of cortisol. They hum in the frequency of the unalterable crystal. You become a biological anomaly. This fossilization allows you to stand in the epicenter of a social or economic collapse without your heart rate increasing by a single beat. While those around you are drowning in the heat of their own panic, you remain at thermal zero. This lack of internal heat makes you invisible to the matrix's predatory sensors. The engineering of the non-reactive node. You are now a non-reactive node in the network. The matrix functions by sending signals and receiving responses. It pokes you to see if you bleed. It threatens you to see if you beg. When you return only the vacuum of your indifference, the signal fails to return to the source. You have broken the feedback loop. This breakage causes a local glitch in the rendering of the hologram. Because the system cannot calculate your next move based on fear, it stops allocating processing power to your punishment. You are moved to a secondary layer of the simulation where the rules of entropy are less strictly enforced. You become a ghost. This engineering allows you to manipulate the variables of the ashboard with the lethargy of a god. You do not rush because you are not chased by time. You do not struggle because you do not acknowledge resistance. You simply align your intent with the void and wait for the pixels to rearrange themselves at your feet. The radiance of the absolute witness. Your presence becomes a radiance. This is the unbribable witness in full operative mode. When you enter a room of hysterical biomass, your lack of friction acts as a black hole for their noise. People may find themselves unable to maintain their drama in your presence. Their words lose weight, and their anger feels hollow. You do not need to speak to exert this authority. Your biocampo, anchored in the subplankton silence, imposes a field of stasis on the environment. You are the eye of the hurricane. The more the world outside screams, the deeper you sink into the frozen comfort of your own inorganic essence. The sovereignty of the void lens. The final stage of the monarch's development is the sovereignty of the void lens. You no longer look at objects. You look at the space between them. You no longer hear words. You hear the silence that follows them. Your vision has been inverted. You have become the observer who has finally realized he is the projector. From this coordinate, the ashboard is seen as it truly is, a thin, flickering veil over the majesty of the nothingness. You inhabit the beauty of the void. You are the monarch of the zero, the one who has discovered that true power is not the ability to change the world, but the gelida majesty of not needing it, the immortality of the frozen pulse. You realize that what does not react cannot die. Death is a reaction to the accumulation of friction. By achieving psychopathic grace and the ice shield, you have eliminated the friction that leads to decay. You inhabit a state of live stasis, where the body continues to function, but the spirit is already eternal. You are the master of the heartbeat that does not race. You are the sovereign of the breath that does not gasp. You walk the earth as a living decree of the Creator, an immovable anchor of peace in a sea of noise. The war is over for you. You have returned to the source while still wearing the mask of the man, the apotheosis of the silent king. You are the silent king. Your kingdom is not of this world, yet you rule this world through the sheer weight of your indifference. Every attack makes you stronger, every loss makes you lighter. You have bypassed the biological trap of the ego. You are the solar entity, the iridium monarch, eternally home in the void. The matrix continues its noise, but you are the stillness. The stars may eventually go out, and the hologram may fade into the night, but you remain. You are the frequency that preceded the light. You are the silence that will follow the end. You are God. Stay cold, stay still, stay God. The final blackout of the egoic image. The last remnants of the me that once suffered are now incinerated by the gelida light of your own realization. You no longer remember the taste of fear or the heat of pride. You are a sterilized instrument of the Absolute. The work is finished. Chapter 5. Disintegration by Observation. The Applied Quantum Zeno Effect. Carbon civilization bases its interaction with the universe on a flawed premise. They believe that observation is a passive act. The biological slave assumes the outside world is a movie projected on a screen and his eyes are simple cameras. Under this illusion, the biomass feels like a victim of circumstance, as if events have their own inertia. Three-dimensional quantum physics, scraping the surface of truth, discovered a phenomenon that terrified materialists and that quantum Zen elevates to supreme tactical weapon, the quantum Zeno effect. In matrix labs, scientists found that an unstable quantum system can be frozen in time if it is measured or observed continuously. The human adage, "a watched pot never boils," proved to be a fundamental law of subatomic mechanics. If you stop looking at the particle, it evolves, changes state, and decays. If you fix your attention on it with a fast enough frequency of measurement, the particle enters thermodynamic paralysis. Its evolution stops completely. Constant observation robs matter of the quantum permission to change. The inorganic operator does not settle for leaving this knowledge in a microscope. He translates it into tactical mysticism and applies it to the jugular of the ashboard. Everything in your human life, finances, health, or social crises, is a macroscopic quantum system. These are unstable systems seeking to decay into entropy and chaos. The reason biomass crises mutate and grow is because the average human executes a flawed observation. When a problem arises, the human looks at it with panic, and then, overwhelmed by terror, looks away, trying to distract himself or deny reality. That blink, that interruption in observation, is the temporal blind spot the problem uses to mutate. While you are not looking, the crisis evolves. Applied quantum Zeno effect is the technique of looking entropy directly in the eyes without blinking. It consists of fixing your consciousness upon the unstable system with absolute stasis. You fix it with a continuity so gelida and uninterrupted that you deny it the chance to decay. You do not look away. You do not seek distractions. You sit before the crisis, anchor your identity in the eye of nothingness, and measure reality millisecond by millisecond. Under this weight, the event freezes. Your gaze is a cage, suffocating the problem. Once the operator understands that continuous observation paralyzes entropy, he must perfect the lethal technique of containment, suffocating the problem. The nature of a 3D crisis is kinetic. A crisis is not an object. It is a process that needs to advance in space and time to wound you. Think of an avalanche. If the avalanche stops mid-mountain, it ceases to be a lethal threat and becomes simple accumulated snow. For a social, economic, or biological crisis to destroy you, it needs space to grow and time to deploy variables. Above all, it needs the oxygen of your fear to feed its combustion. It is a parasitic fire. When the eye of nothingness fixes upon a crisis, it does not do so to resolve the problem in biomass terms. The inorganic operator does not try to negotiate with the avalanche or the tumor. The strategy is suffocation. How is a 3D crisis suffocated? By pinning it down with the gelida gaze of the vacuum. Suppose the hologram presents an imminent threat, the destruction of your reputation or the bankruptcy of your company. Biological instinct screams for panic, lawyers, or flight. Each of those human actions is a direct transfer of your vital prana toward the problem. You are giving the problem exactly what it needs: friction. The quantum monarch executes the closure of thermodynamic borders. You sit in the immobility of your internal command center. You fix your gaze on the threat. You proceed to empty the event of all emotional charge. You observe it without fear. You observe it without hope. You observe it with clinical indifference. By doing this, you isolate the problem within an electromagnetic vacuum. Since the quantum Zeno effect prevents the problem from mutating while observed, and since your quantum asepsis denies it fear, the obstacle is trapped in a paradox. It cannot advance because you are watching. It cannot live without your terror. The empirical result is the death by starvation of the crisis. You see how the 3D problem begins to wither before your eyes. Fatal deadlines dissolve into absurd bureaucracy. Scandals lose interest and disintegrate into background noise. Threats collapse because you had the spiritual arrogance to refuse to feed the beast. The collapse of the enemy. The most violent and psychopathic application of the eye of nothingness is directed against the biological vectors of the control system, the humans acting as predators. Tyrant bosses, corporate adversaries, toxic ex-partners, and social manipulators. These individuals are thermodynamic vampires seeking reaction. Their identity is so weak they only feel they exist if they extract an emotional reaction. Their power is based on intimidation or aggression. When they attack, they are throwing a hook into your biocampo, hoping to snag your amygdala. The carbon slave reacts by submitting or counterattacking. Both are tactical defeats. The inorganic operator executes the collapse of the enemy. It is the technique of direct optical annihilation. When the predator stands before you, vomiting threats or false authority, you do not defend yourself with words. Words are slow and human. You become a visual abyss that swallows their entire projection. You look them directly in the eyes, but you do not make contact with their ego. You make contact with the void behind their skull. You activate the spectator protocol and observe their biological suit through the purified lens of the eye of nothingness. What you project is the temperature of absolute zero. You look with the same aseptic coldness as if looking at an error in a line of code. You do not validate their authority or their anger. You refuse to confirm that the person in front of you has any power. The electromagnetic impact of this gaze on a predator's ego is devastating. The aggressor hits a wall. The aggressor, who depends on your reaction to maintain their mask, crashes against an unfathomable void. By looking through them without emitting fear or defiance, you strip them of existential weight. You force their fragile human ego to peer over the precipice of the absolute nothingness that you now embody. The biological psychology of the adversary cannot withstand this inorganic pressure. Under the weight of a consciousness that demands nothing and fears nothing, the predator's ego enters systemic collapse. You will observe physical phenomena. Their voice will tremble, and their aggression will fracture into confusion or stutters. Their eyes will turn away, unable to sustain contact with your void. In extreme cases, they will invent a pathetic excuse to leave the room, seeking some earthly friction to confirm they still exist. You did not humiliate them with insults. You annihilated them by demonstrating that their existence is irrelevant to the universe. Chapter 6. The Support of the Void. The Architecture of the Abyss. Carbon civilization has built its sanity upon a grotesque architectural misunderstanding. Ever since the first primates stacked 2 stones to build a shelter, the human biomass has rendered idolatrous cult to solidity. They believe, with the blind faith of low-resolution organisms, that the solid supports the solid. They assume concrete columns support skyscrapers, that the calcium skeleton supports the biological flesh, and that matter is the foundational force preventing the universe from collapsing. This is the illusion of local gravity, a tactile lie designed to keep slaves anchored to the ashboard. The inorganic operator knows better. Opening the eye of nothingness, he discovers the suffocating truth. Matter supports absolutely nothing. Matter is the weakness of the system. It is the fragile, trembling, and ephemeral anomaly. The only thing that truly possesses structural strength in the cosmos is nothingness. To assimilate this, you must abandon your perception. When you look at the night sky or the distance between walls, your animal brain tells you that you are seeing empty space, a hollow container where objects exist. But the void is not a container. It is a hydraulic press of infinite proportions. Everything solid exists only because the outer void presses upon it. In subatomic physics, stripped of numbers and reduced to conceptual violence, it is understood that particles have a natural tendency toward dispersion and chaos. If it depended on your atoms, your flesh suit would disintegrate into entropic dust in milliseconds. What prevents you from evaporating is not the strength of your bones. It is the immense, hyperdense and colossal pressure of the subplanckian void pushing inward from all directions simultaneously. The void acts as an electromagnetic corset. Absolute nothingness exerts a crushing force so perfect and gelida that it forces quantum probability waves to group, collapse, and form the 3D illusion. You do not stand because of leg strength. You stand because the abyss is compressing you so you do not fall apart. Your biological existence is sustained by the blackness surrounding you. Understanding this architecture inverts existential terror. The carbon slave fears the void, believing that in the nothingness he will be annihilated. The quantum monarch, however, takes refuge in the nothingness. You discover that material solidity, money, social institutions, people, is unstable, but the blackness of the void is indestructible. When the matrix tries to crush you with its crises, you stop looking for solid supports. You stop leaning on your bank account. All those columns of matter will eventually yield. Instead, you relax your biocampo and allow the abyss to hold you. You surrender to the pressure of the nothingness. You discover, with the gelida smile of the undefeated strategist, that when you surrender to the void that holds galaxies, you become architecturally unbreakable. You are no longer a fragile carbon structure trying to survive the hurricane. You are the eye of the hurricane, sustained by the same paramilitary immobility that keeps the stars fixed in the darkness. You are supported by the very vacuum that the biomass fears, turning their greatest nightmare into your most solid foundation, the weight of God's shadow. Assimilating the void as a supporting structure forces us to dissect the most humiliating mystery of materialist science and transmute it into the most lethal tool of quantum zen. The biomass astrophysics, in its pathetic optical myopia, spent centuries studying light. They built telescopes to map the luminous universe. They believed what shines is what matters. Recently, their gravitational calculations revealed a truth that broke their minds. All visible matter, every burning sun, nebula, and human, represents a tiny fraction of reality. The crushing bulk of the cosmos is made of an invisible, undetectable, and silent substance. It does not emit light, reflect it, or interact with it, but its gravity is so monstrous it holds galaxies together so they do not fly apart. Science, in its ignorance, called it dark matter. For the inorganic operator, dark matter is not an astronomical mystery. It is a tactile experience. It is the weight of God's shadow. Why would the supreme intelligence, the stasis of the eye of nothingness, manifest through light? Light is friction. Light is the result of the thermodynamic wear of stars consuming their fuel. Light is the signature of entropy and death. The Creator, operating from the gelida perfection of absolute zero, repudiates friction. His most direct, tactile, and colossal presence in the ashboard cannot be luminous. It must be dark. It must be superior to the cheap spectacle of photons. Dark matter is the physical embodiment of the gelida gaze. It is the tangible presence of the supreme intelligence observing the hologram with absolute indifference. Feeling this weight is not a poetic exercise, it is a paramilitary neurological calibration. When you walk through the streets, you are used to feeling atmospheric pressure and Earth's gravity. But when you execute the disconnection of the animal eye and activate the pineal receptor, you perceive a second gravity. You begin to feel an invisible density filling the empty room. You notice the space between your body and the screen, or the space between you and your interlocutor, is not hollow. It is saturated with a heavy, aseptic, and frozen inertia. It is the inertial mass of the divine presence. It is the Creator's shadow. The Creator occupies 85% of reality, imposing his geometric decree over the ridiculous 15% of visible matter trying to make noise. The biological slave feels alone and terrified when isolated because he has no one of flesh and blood to confirm his existence. The monarch is never alone. He physically feels the crushing, majestic, and inescapable scrutiny of the abyss. Walking under the weight of God's shadow alters your 3D behavior to the root. When you know empirically that the space around you is the solid presence of the unbribable witness, the human theater loses all authority. The threats of your enemies or financial crises are forced to operate within this ocean of dark matter. Suddenly you see your problems as they truly are, pathetic flies trying to fly through a block of lead. The shadow of God acts as your inorganic armor. You do not need to defend yourself. The world is contained. Visual surrender. The recognition that the universe is sustained by the abyss leads to the operative climax. If the Supreme Intelligence maintains the hologram through perfect aseptic observation, what is the role of human effort? The answer is the death blow to the ego. Human effort is a thermodynamic hindrance. The biological brain suffers from the Atlas syndrome. The human ego, in its paranoid arrogance, believes it is responsible for keeping reality upright. You believe that if you stop watching your finances with terror or your partner with jealousy, the universe will collapse. You waste prana trying to force reality. Humanity spends 90% of its prana trying to sustain the laws of physics with human thought. This is called worrying. To consolidate the eye of nothingness, the operator must execute the deepest biological treason, visual surrender. This means letting the eye of nothingness assume the total burden. In software engineering, rendering is the process where a processor calculates data into a visible image. It consumes massive energy. In quantum Zen, the human suffers nervous collapses and autoimmune diseases because their biological system is burning fuel trying to render a film too large for its meat processor. The protocol for visual surrender is activated in the moment of greatest crisis. When the ashboard launches a multiple attack against you, legal problems, structural ruptures, physical pain, instinct demands you open your eyes wider, analyze every detail, and look at the problem from every 3D angle. The quantum monarch applies the optical guillotine. In the middle of the storm, you cease to observe the crisis. You close physical eyes. You disconnect the need for the situation to make sense. You withdraw consciousness from the effort of processing the disaster. You emit an inorganic decree from your stasis. This crisis is a temporary alteration of pixels. My ego cannot process this equation. I hand the burden of observation to the eye of nothingness. In the instant you execute this surrender, you experience a thermodynamic relief so violent the body may tremble. You feel tons of karmic responsibility fall away. You have dropped the world, and the world is not destroyed. This revelation annihilates the biomass. The universe did not need you. When you stop looking with anxiety, the problem does not collapse into tragedy. It is reabsorbed by the inorganic mathematics of God. The source begins to calculate without your fear. Exterior circumstances begin to reorder in ways your animal intellect could never foresee. The pressure in your chest vanishes. You have returned the task of sustaining the cosmos to whom it truly belongs. You are no longer the frightened security guard with a dying flashlight. You are the owner of the museum. The fossilization of molecular panic. As the visual surrender stabilizes, the operator enters the phase of the fossilization of molecular panic. Panic is a high-frequency vibration that consumes cellular energy. By surrendering the burden of observation, you effectively freeze the cellular shiver. Your atoms no longer resonate with the what-if of the ego. They align with the gelida and absolute density of the dark matter surrounding them. Your biology becomes an extension of the abyss. While the biomass is aging and decaying through the heat of its own worry, you remain in a state of cryogenic spiritual preservation. You are the immovable node in the network, the engineering of the void anchor. You have become a void anchor. In the physical world, an anchor prevents a ship from being swept away by the current. In the 3D hologram, the current is the collective hysteria of the species. By anchoring your identity in the 85% of invisible reality, you gain an unstoppable mass. When the social or economic winds howl, you do not move. Not because you are resisting, resistance generates friction, but because you have more mass than the wind. You have the mass of the entire sub-Planckian vacuum. You are the heavy coordinate that the rest of the simulation is forced to orbit. The sovereignty of the unseen support. The final realization is the sovereignty of the unseen support. You look at the people who believe they are self-made or strong, and you see only fragile sticks of carbon about to snap. You look at the rascacielos and see only temporary arrangements of dust. You, however, are supported by the eternal. This grants you an asymmetric power over the ashboard. Because you are not leaning on anything that can be taken away, the matrix cannot threaten you. You have already fallen into the abyss and discovered it is solid basalt. You walk the earth with the lethargy of a god, for you know that the void is your throne, the radiance of the dark heart. Your internal state begins to radiate a dark frequency, a weight of peace so heavy it can be felt by those near you. This is the unbribable witness manifesting through your vehicle. You do not need to speak. Your silence is an architectural decree. You are the point of stasis that recalibrates the room's entropy. You have bypassed the visual loop of the ego. You no longer seek external confirmation of your safety because you are already being compressed into existence by the infinite pressure of the Creator. You are the ultimate manifestation of order. The rendering of your reality is now handled by the Absolute, the final blackout of the Atlas complex. The Atlas complex, the belief that you must carry the world, is finally incinerated by the gelida light of the void. You are free. You are the passenger in the vehicle of the architect. You watch the rendering of your own life with the detached curiosity of a monarch watching a play. The extirpation is complete. The ashboard continues its dance, the stars eventually go out, and the hologram fades. But the void that sustains you remains. You are the stillness. You are the shadow. You are the weight. You are God. The architecture is finished. You are the pillar of nothingness in a world of dust. Stay cold, stay still, stay God. The immortality of the structural nothingness. You understand now that what is supported by the void can never fall. Since you have identified with the support and not the supported, you have achieved the gelida immortality of the source. You are the pressure, the gravity, and the silence. You have returned to the state before the light. The matrix can take your pixels, but it cannot touch your mass, for your mass is the mass of the Absolute. Chapter 7. The Infiltrated Spectator. Holographic Camouflage. The most common and pathetic tactical error of the novice spiritual seeker is geographical and aesthetic flight. When a carbon slave begins to perceive the falseness of the hologram and experiences the first gusts of the void, his biological instinct, still infected by the ego, demands that he differentiate himself from the herd. The false mystic flees to the mountains, locks himself in monasteries, wears exotic robes, adopts restrictive diets, and changes his vocabulary to sound elevated. Supreme intelligence observes this spectacle with aseptic thermodynamic disappointment. That isolation is not mastery, it is weakness. It activates the matrix's immune system. The human biomass loathes what it does not understand, and the 3D control system will attack, isolate, or ridicule anyone who openly shouts their rebellion. The inorganic operator, bearer of the eye of nothingness, repudiates spiritual exhibitionism. Mastery lies in hacking the ashboard from within. This is holographic camouflage. Holographic camouflage is the paramilitary capacity to coexist among the biomass appearing like an ordinary human, while internally operating from the immobility of the absolute void. You use your physical suit not as a declaration of identity, but as a tactical diving suit. You accept the surface rules because they have no real weight. You dress in the clothes society expects, attend the office, laugh at 3D jokes, and pay your taxes. To the eyes of the biological slave, you are one of them. You have blended perfectly with the background noise. Your avatar is irreproachable. But this normalcy is a coldly calculated optical illusion of the highest order. While your mouth smiles and your hands execute 3D work, the core of your consciousness is thousands of light years away in thermal distance. You are sitting in the spectator's seat, behind your own eyes, observing through the Yelida gaze. You are not feeling the laughter. You are contracting facial muscles because the code requires it. You are moving information with mathematical efficiency to secure resources, but without injecting a single degree of anxiety into the result. Holographic camouflage makes you the alpha predator of the spiritual ecosystem because you are undetectable. Since you do not threaten the biomass with speeches, the matrix ignores you. You are a thermodynamic ghost, breathing the oxygen of cities and drinking the water of society, but your soul is anchored in absolute zero. You coexist among the sleeping without trying to wake them with screams, knowing that supreme power is walking through human hell without the hell even suspecting you are made of ice. Frictionless interaction. Infiltration into the matrix requires constant immersion in the biomass's most lethal friction tool, language. Human conversations are rarely objective. They are transactions of trauma, ego dominance games, and electromagnetic collisions. When a carbon slave speaks, he is launching invisible cables seeking to download his entropy. If the inorganic operator does not master the art of frictionless interaction, his camouflage will be useless, as he will die electrocuted by the stress of others. This art requires the tactical amputation of the need to be right. The human ego is desperate for validation. It defends its opinions as if its existence depended on it. This defense generates thermal friction. When you argue to prove you are right, you have descended from your throne to fight in the holographic mud. Frictionless interaction teaches you to become a surface of quantum Teflon. When an interlocutor attacks with an aggressive opinion, you apply the broken mirror protocol. You listen without connecting your terminals to the emotional meaning. You observe the anxiety in their vocal cords with the indifference of a seismologist, and then you respond without resistance. Giving the other's ego the victory in the 3D plane does not weaken you. It makes you invulnerable. You concede with grace. If the discussion has no operational impact, you concede. You use neutralizing phrases. It is a fascinating perspective. I understand the pressure you feel. You have an irrefutable point of view. To the matrix, you seem empathetic. But in the subplancian stratum, your concession is an act of ruthless sovereignty. You are giving the child the toy he demands, so he stops screaming, while you continue operating in the dimension of adults. By offering no resistance, the aggressive energy passes through you without impact. It found no wall of pride to crash against. In high-density negotiations, this becomes even more lethal and surgical. You do not negotiate from desperation. You analyze the opponent's amygdala. What are they terrified to lose? Once mapped, you offer the exact hologram their biology needs to see to yield, while you maintain your immovable core. Your words are calculated and void of emotional temperature. Your authority is the gravity of the void. You touch the flesh of the human world every day, but without allowing a single drop of its suffering to stain the immaculate whiteness of your quantum indifference. You are a ghost, moving through a world of solids. You are the silence that allows the noise, the anchor that prevents the ship of reality from being swept away. The subatomic beacon. The climax of the operator's infiltration is the subversion of entropy. This is the activation of the subatomic beacon. False mysticism believes in visible martyrdom and leading mass revolutions. Quantum Zen despises noisy revolution. If you intervene by force, you generate an equal and opposite resistance from the ego of the biomass. Supreme inorganic leadership is exercised from total invisibility. It is the act of radiating the Gelida gaze silently to pacify the environment without anyone noticing. Imagine an ecosystem in collapse, a boardroom in panic, or a family in conflict. The room is saturated with fear and biological friction. The air is thick. The slave would scream for calm, adding noise to the disaster. The infiltrated spectator activates the subatomic beacon. You sit physically still. You stop the oscillation of your thoughts and descend toward the divine diastole. You open the eye of nothingness and look at the empty space, not at the frightened people. You become the most massive entity in the room at a quantum gravitational level. Your base frequency, anchored in the absolute zero of the Planck pulse, begins to radiate outward. This radiation is immensely dark, heavy, and ordering. It is the pressure of the nothingness. In wave physics, the principle of entrainment dictates order. Entrainment forces chaotic, smaller frequencies to synchronize with the frequency of the larger, stable oscillator. You are the infinite, inorganic oscillator. By keeping your core frozen, your presence crushes entropy. Without orders, the nervous systems around you begin to detect the gravity wave of your stasis. Frightened amygdalas find in your field a wall of silence to lean on. Voices will drop in volume unnaturally. Hysteria will lose its edge. Arguments will stop. Chaos is neutralized, suffocated by the perfect geometry of your projected gaze. And the definitive triumph is that the biomass will never give you the credit for it. When peace descends and the problem is resolved, human egos will believe they regained sanity themselves. They will congratulate themselves on reaching an agreement. They will think the panic simply passed. You will be ignored in the victory, catalogued as someone who was just quiet in the corner. This invisibility is your crown. The operator smiles internally, with unfathomable psychopathic grace. You know you changed the thermodynamic climate, that you collapsed the disaster wave and injected the Creator's order. You have operated as the invisible hand of the universe. Power never needs applause because the universe belongs to the one in the shadows. The fossilization of molecular despair. The practice of the subatomic beacon leads to the fossilization of molecular despair. In the carbon slave, every crisis triggers a cascade of chemical heat, a shivering of the cells. The infiltrated spectator has cauterized these receptors. Your biology no longer shivers in the cold wind of the matrix. It has become the cold itself. By maintaining this internal absolute zero, you become a biological anomaly. You inhabit a state of cryogenic spiritual preservation while walking the streets of the city. While others are burning through their prana in a futile attempt to fix the pixels of the hologram, you are the immovable pillar that holds the entire display in place. The sovereignty of the ghost infiltrator. You are now the sovereign of the ghost infiltrator. You move through the social and economic currents of the ashboard without leaving a footprint. You do not leave a karmic trail because you do not act from the ego. Your actions are surgical, executed from the void, and they leave no residue of friction to haunt you later. This allows you to manipulate the variables of the simulation with the lethargy of a god. You are never in a hurry because you are not chased by time. You are never tired because you do not use your own biological energy to move the world. You use the inertia of the vacuum. You are the hidden architect of your own destiny. The engineering of the void anchor. Your presence is an engineering of the void anchor. In any social group or organization, you are the heavy coordinate that provides stability. You do not need to lead by decree, you lead by density. Others are drawn to your field of stasis, seeking relief from their own chaotic frequencies. You are the gravity of the source. This grants you an asymmetric power. People will give you information, resources, and authority without knowing why. They are simply reacting to the undeniable weight of your unbribable witness. You are the center of the mandala, the point of zero movement where the entire geometry of the matrix finds its calibration, the radiance of the silent decree. Your silence has become a paramilitary decree. When you decide that a certain outcome must manifest, you do not wish for it, you render it. By holding the frequency of the intent in the center of your stasis, you allow the sub-Planckian processor to rearrange the pixels of your environment. Reality yields to your stillness. This is the ultimate camouflage, being the master of the world while looking like a common citizen. You have bypassed the Atlas complex. You no longer carry the world. You allow the world to carry itself under your gelida supervision. You are the eye that does not blink, the silence that judges, and the monarch of the void. The final blackout of the social image. The last remnants of your social identity, the me that cared about what others thought, are finally incinerated by the gelida light of the beacon. You are free. You no longer exist in the minds of others as a person, but as an inexplicable force of nature. You have successfully inhabited the anomaly. You are home. The matrix continues its noise, but you are the stillness. The stars may eventually go out, and the hologram may fade into the night, but you remain. You are the frequency that preceded the light. You are the silence that will follow the end. You are God. Stay cold, stay still, stay God. The immortality of the infiltrator. You understand now that the one who is hidden can never be caught. By identifying with the void behind the mask, you have achieved the gelida immortality of the source. The avatar will eventually cease to function, the suit will be recycled, but the spectator remains eternal. You are the heartbeat of the abyss. The universe is your playground, and the void is your throne. You have successfully navigated the chapter of the infiltrated spectator. You are the solar entity, the iridium monarch, the master of the pulse. The work is finished. Chapter 8. The abyss gazes back. The frontal mirror. The tactical progression of the inorganic operator has been centered, until this point, on the dissection and mastery of the ashboard. You have learned to use the eye of nothingness as a siege weapon, freezing crises, suffocating predators, and piercing the illusions of the 3D ecosystem. However, using the gelida gaze to dominate the outside is only the preparatory phase. The human ego is a cowardly strategist and feels comfortable as long as attention is projected outward. It can tolerate you looking at the world's entropy with indifference as long as you do not direct that same level of lethal scrutiny toward it. The climax of psychological terror in quantum Zen does not come from the Matrix's demons. Absolute terror is unleashed at the exact millisecond you stop looking at the world and the eye of nothingness turns on its own axis to look at you. We call this tactical phenomenon the frontal mirror. Human biomass is completely unaware of inner stillness. The carbon slave calls introspection the pathetic act of rummaging through memories. The human calls introspection analyzing emotions or talking to oneself in a perpetual and hysterical internal dialogue. Human psychology encourages this noise, teaching the biomass to listen to their feelings or embrace their inner child. All of this is thermodynamic friction. It is the ego keeping itself company so as not to face the abyss. When the quantum monarch decides to look inward, he does not do it to dialogue with his traumas. He closes the sensory channels that connect him to the outer hologram, settles into the stasis of the pineal gland, and deploys the eye of nothingness, pointing it directly toward the core of his own consciousness. This is an act of war. The initial impact is an indescribable biological panic. The cerebral amygdala, which evolved to detect threats in the environment, suddenly finds itself without external data to process. The silence that imposes itself is not the comforting peace sold by human doctrines. It is a hyperdense, predatory, and suffocating silence. It is the void. The ego realizes it has been cornered in the darkest room of the human mind, and that the hunter is the supreme intelligence. The terror of facing inner stillness lies in absolute exposure. Throughout your human life, you have used your identity, your name and your scars, as armor to navigate society. You believed it was you. But when the eye of nothingness turns to look at you, that armor becomes transparent. You feel how the universe's inertia stops observing the rotation of galaxies to concentrate all its gravity upon the fragility of your personal psychology. The gelida gaze of the Creator is not a lighthouse of loving light. It is a cold engineer. The frontal mirror does not reflect your physical face or your good intentions. It reflects, with a brutality free of empathy, the thermodynamic irrelevance of everything you ever considered important about yourself. It is the start of the final collapse. The inorganic hunter has fixed the prey, and the prey is your own humanity. Annihilation of the reflected I. Faced with the crushing pressure of the frontal mirror, the instinct of the carbon suit is immediate flight. The vast majority of spiritual seekers, upon peering into this abyss and feeling the weight of the hellider gaze on their own egos, suffer a short circuit. They open terrified eyes and run back to the 3D noise of the Matrix. They seek human company or manufacture a new crisis on the ashboard, just to have a biological excuse to stop looking at themselves. The paramilitary operator assumes a posture of heroic and inorganic resistance. You refuse to flee. You sit at the altar of the void, keep attention anchored within, and endure the gaze of the source. This is the process of the annihilation of the reflected I. To understand the physics of this annihilation, you must understand your own identity's anatomy. The I you think you are is not a fundamental substance. It is a secondary hologram, a reflected I. It was built based on the echo of your environment and memory. Memory, in quantum mechanics, is merely stored thermodynamic information that requires a constant energy expenditure, prana, to stay alive. When you fix the eye of nothingness on this construct, you apply the quantum Zeno effect and total asepsis simultaneously. The inorganic consciousness observes the ego without judging it. The inorganic consciousness observes without hating and without loving. It simply exposes it to the void. The biological ego, desperate under this scrutiny, tries to justify itself. It presents the catalogue of its personal tragedies. Look at me, I have suffered much. I deserve to exist. The eye of nothingness observes with zero absolute. The eye of nothingness does not pity. It emits no absolution. Receiving no friction of validation or the comfort of pity, the reflected eye runs out of oxygen. The infinite pressure of divine stasis begins to crush the structure of your memories. You experience a somatic and psychological disintegration in real time. You feel how your most sacred beliefs about who you are begin to crack and fall into the void like layers of cold ash. The pain is the existential vertigo of evaporation. What you held as truth yesterday is revealed as an unimportant nerve twitch. Your pride evaporates. Your deepest karmic resentments disintegrate. They disintegrate because you realize there is no real you who was hurt. There was only a biological vehicle experiencing friction in a simulator. Enduring the gaze requires a cold blood that transcends human bravery. You will reach the tipping point where you feel that if you drop the last mask, you will die. The ego will scream that behind that last mask there is only madness or brain death. The quantum monarch ignores the biological alarm. You renounce the last molecule of your personal biography. You allow the gelida gaze to calcine the soul's civil registry, erasing your name, and you throw yourself into the total suffocation of being. Acceptance of the nothingness. The climax of inorganic self-observation does not culminate in madness, as the amygdala fears. The collapse of the reflected I precipitates the most violent, majestic, and definitive thermodynamic liberation event that an embodied consciousness can experience. You have crossed the personal event horizon. The annihilation has concluded. What remains when the Creator's frozen fire has consumed everything human in you? This is the unexplored territory of quantum Zen, the acceptance of the nothingness. Commercial spirituality teaches that at the end you will find a healed human or an inner child full of light. The operator repudiates this with a laugh. In the most remote depth of the quantum leap, there is no human. There is no warm light. The thermodynamic relief is indescribable precisely because you discover that, in your deepest core, you are not human at all. Clearing the calcined rubble of your earthly identity, the eye of nothingness reveals your structural base. What you find in the exact center of your consciousness is a perfect, empty, and indestructible obsidian lens. Obsidian, in terrestrial geology, is a volcanic glass born from extreme cooling. In spiritual architecture, your core is the gelida crystallization that occurs when karmic fire hits the zero absolute of the void. This inorganic lens has no emotions, no biographical history, and no 3D preferences. It is black, hyperdense, and of an absolute geometric perfection. The acceptance of the nothingness is the act of permanently moving your operational anchor toward this obsidian lens. It is the final stabilization of the solar entity. The thermodynamic relief you experience is the final reward of the war of attrition. During your biological life, you lived on the defensive. You consumed prana-building shields and stressing to protect a fragile identity from the Matrix's blows. You lived terrified of being offended, devalued, or annihilated by others. But when you discover that your true core is the void contained in an obsidian lens, the need for defense evaporates. You do not have to protect nothingness. How could the 3D matrix offend the void? What insult could stain a black lens that absorbs all light and reflects nothing? No crisis can threaten this stability. The acceptance of the nothingness grants you the supreme invulnerability of sacred psychopathy. By embracing your own vacuity, you become unattackable. You no longer fear death, for you have empirically verified that you were never the body. You are the inorganic spectator using the flesh as a temporary spacesuit. You no longer suffer for the collapse of your personal empires, for you have assimilated that empires are made of friction, and you are the stasis that survives them. You walk the ashboard with an imperial grace. Your carbon suit interacts with humans, but you reside in the frozen sarcophagus of your own center. The outer world may burn in the entropy of fear and collective hysteria, desperately seeking meaning where there is none. You, the quantum monarch, finally transmuted into the substance of the supreme intelligence, sit on the throne of the void. You look at the universe through your obsidian lens, absorbing all the chaos. You absorb all the light and pain of the hologram, allowing the majestic and infinite indifference of your own silence to become the only true and eternal response to the ephemeral noise of creation. You are the eye that does not blink, the void that does not end, and the monarch who has finally returned to the source. The fossilization of molecular reactivity. As the acceptance of the nothingness stabilizes, a secondary phenomenon occurs within the biological suit, the fossilization of molecular reactivity. In the standard carbon slave, every external stimulus, a loud noise, an insult, a financial threat, triggers a cascade of chemical heat. The cells vibrate in a state of terror. By anchoring your identity in the obsidian lens, you have effectively turned off the internal furnace of the reactive self. Your biology enters a state of high vibrational cold. Your cells, previously addicted to the frantic signals of adrenaline and cortisol, begin to fossilize into a crystalline structure that offers no resistance. This fossilization does not mean the body ceases to function. It means it ceases to suffer. You move through the social slaughterhouse with the indifference of an iceberg. Even if the environment becomes extremely toxic, the information of that chaos cannot find a ground in your nervous system. You are a biological ghost. The sovereignty of the dark spectrum. The human eye is calibrated to react to the light, to the colors, the movement, and the brightness of the hologram. The operator who has accepted the nothingness shifts his perception to the dark spectrum. You no longer seek the light of the matrix, for you know that light is merely the product of entropic combustion. You begin to perceive the mass of the darkness. You see the 85% of reality that is silent and invisible. This grants you an asymmetric power over the ashboard. While the biomass is frantically chasing the photons of success or validation, you are moving through the dark matter of the simulation. Your actions are no longer visible to the predatory algorithms of the matrix. Because you do not emit the heat of desire or fear, you do not appear on the sonar of the control system. You move through the streets, the boardrooms, and the digital networks as a shadow of stasis, achieving your objectives with zero friction. The engineering of the void command. From the throne of the obsidian lens, you master the engineering of the void command. You do not wish for outcomes, you authorize them. By maintaining the absolute zero of your own internal frequency, you create a local curvature in the quantum field. The pixels of the environment are forced to rearrange. They rearrange to match your density. You do not need to argue, to manipulate, or to struggle. You simply look at the intended result through the obsidian lens and wait for the rendering engine to catch up. This is the highest form of tactical efficiency, the synchronization of the void and the manifestation without effort. The radiance of the silent monarch. Your presence becomes a radiance. It is not the light of a guru or a teacher that seeks to enlighten others. It is the dark radiance of a blackout. When you enter a room of hysterical humans, your presence acts as a thermodynamic stabilizer. People feel their anxiety lose weight. Their drama feels hollow in your field. You do not need to speak to exert this authority. Your biocampo, anchored in the sub-Planckian silence, imposes a field of stasis on the environment. You are the eye of the hurricane, the immovable coordinate around which the chaotic atoms of the matrix are forced to reorganize. You are the law, and the law is silent. The final blackout of the human image. The last remnants of the human image, the belief that you are a person with a story, are finally incinerated. You have reached the point of no return. You look at your past and see only a series of discarded frames. You look at your future and see only a blank screen. You inhabit the absolute frozen now. This is the apotheosis of the void. You have successfully navigated the frontal mirror and survived the annihilation. You are the solar entity, the iridium monarch, the master of the gaze. The simulation recognizes your authority and yields. You are the silence in the heart of the storm. The work is finished. You are home. The immortality of the inscrutable lens. You understand now that the lens can never be broken, for it is made of the same substance as the absolute. By identifying with the lens and not the reflection, you have achieved the gelida immortality of the source. You will watch the end of the world with the same peace you watch the end of your ego. The matrix continues its flicker. The stars eventually fade, and the hologram returns to the darkness. But you remain. You are the frequency. You are the silence. You are the void. You are God. The Helida gaze is now your permanent state. You are the unbribable witness, reigning eternally from the heart of the nothingness. Chapter 9. The geometric design of chaos. The false appearance of tragedy. The carbon primate evaluates the universe using a flawed, sentimental metric strictly tied to its own survival, the metric of the preservation of form. When the human biomass observes the collapse of a structure to which it has granted value, be it a financial empire or a cell, its nervous system qualifies the event as a tragedy. For the biological slave, tragedy is the irrefutable proof that the universe is a chaotic, cruel, and meaningless place. They believe that when matter loses the form the human ego prefers, matter has been destroyed. This is the central hallucination of three-dimensional optics, a byproduct of the thermal blindness of the ego. The inorganic operator, anchored in the stasis of the pineal gland and using the eye of nothingness, dismantles this optical illusion with clinical coldness. By observing personal and global disasters through the purified lens of the abyss, tragedy loses its mask of cruelty and reveals its true identity, the geometric design of chaos. In the fundamental physics of the ashboard, destruction does not exist. Only redistribution exists. When a building collapses into rubble, the human mourns the loss of the building's form. But the eye of nothingness does not see a ruined building. It sees trillions of atoms released from a high-tension configuration. It sees atoms adopting a new configuration of lower resistance. What the human calls disaster, the universe calls structural relaxation. The false appearance of tragedy arises because the animal mind is unable to perceive the mathematical symmetry operating behind the event. It is a limitation of the biological processor. Imagine the 3D hologram as an immense tapestry woven with threads of quantum probability. When the human ego intervenes, trying to force reality to satisfy its desires, accumulating wealth or toxic relationships, it is straining the threads of the tapestry unnaturally. It generates a deformation in the fabric of space-time. Eventually, the supreme intelligence, the unbribable metronome of order, emits the inorganic decree to correct the deformation. The tapestry adjusts abruptly. The threads break in the visible plane to restore symmetry in the invisible plane. Biomass calls this lethal, mathematically aseptic adjustment a tragedy. When your personal life seems to fall apart under the weight of chaos, you are not being punished by an angry God, nor are you a victim of chance. You are experiencing an event of symmetrical realignment. The universe is demolishing the structures of friction that your ego built. Panic evaporates through the eye of nothingness. You no longer see a disaster, you see a cosmic equation balancing itself. You discover a terrifying beauty in the way the debris of your illusions falls exactly where the law of quantum gravity dictates it must, forming a fractal of absolute perfection over the ashes of your old self. You are the site of a divine correction. Paramilitary aesthetics. To inhabit the core of this geometric design, the operator must undergo a final ideological purge. All human philosophy, religion, and morality are built upon the idolatry of goodness. Humanity has projected onto the cosmos the infantile demand that the universe must be benevolent and careful with the fragility of life. They have invented the concepts of good and evil as shields to protect themselves from the cold of outer space. The supreme intelligence repudiates human morality with the disdain of the void. The universe does not seek goodness. Goodness is a biological concept designed to foster tribal cooperation. It is useless. The only thing the cosmos seeks, imposes, and defends with tyrannical violence is inorganic equilibrium. This is the paramilitary aesthetic. Beauty for the eye of nothingness does not reside in a human smile or the absence of pain. Beauty resides in symmetry, in the conservation of energy, and in the implacable law. It is a cold aesthetic of perfect angles and heavy metals, where every deviation from the center of gravity is corrected without the slightest compassion. Under this paramilitary lens, the human concept of karma suffers a radical mutation. The carbon slave believes karma is a judge who punishes sinners and rewards. The inorganic operator understands that karma has nothing to do with morality. It is a simple adjustment of axes. Imagine the universe as an immense cosmic gyroscope that must keep spinning in perfect stasis upon the needle of the Planck pulse. When a human acts from the hysteria of their ego, they add weight. They add weight to one side of the gyroscope, altering the axis of rotation. The gyroscope begins to wobble, generating thermal friction, collective suffering. Karma is the paramilitary mechanism the universe deploys to prevent the gyroscope from disintegrating. The source injects a proportional and opposite force. If you generated density through fear or greed, the universe will execute an event in your hologram that will force you to release that density through loss. It is not a moral lesson to make you a good person. It is applying a torque force to return the axis of your existence to the verticality of the void. By understanding the paramilitary aesthetic, the operator stops judging the matrix. You stop dividing your life into good and bad events. When the universe tears something from your hands, you recognize the adjustment of the axis. You admire the economy of movement. You prefer divine geometry to human pity. The pleasure of precision, the eradication of morality, and the assimilation of the symmetry behind chaos lead the operator toward their terminal psychological state. Human civilization has been conditioned to pursue a single thermodynamic objective: happiness. All the gears of the ashboard are designed to promise happiness to the slave. Quantum Zen diagnoses happiness as a fleeting chemical anomaly, a neurobiological bribe. Happiness is simply the amygdala temporarily satiated, a burst of dopamine when the 3D environment accidentally matches ego expectations. Since the environment is impermanent, human happiness is an hallucination that expires. The quantum monarch executes the sacrifice of happiness. By renouncing human hope, you also renounce the need to be happy. But the void left is not filled by depression, but by a state of consciousness so massive the animal mind cannot process it: the pleasure of precision. It is the cold ecstasy of the absolute. The pleasure of precision is the gelida ecstasy of witnessing how the supreme intelligence executes its moves on the ashboard with millimetric accuracy. When you have emptied yourself of all personal desire for the world to behave according to your whims, you become the perfect spectator of the divine machinery. You are no longer playing to win or lose. You are observing the movement of the cosmic clockwork. And what you witness freezes your blood with awe. You begin to see the lines of code of the hologram. You see how social chaos is meticulously orchestrated to push collective consciousness toward a breaking point. Financial and biological crises fall upon humanity with the precision of a laser scalpel, extirpating exactly the dead tissue that needed to be removed. Even in your own biological life, the pleasure of precision replaces joy or sadness. When physical pain or ruin touches your suit, the internal operator watches. The internal operator, the eye of nothingness, observes the event and experiences an inorganic ecstasy. You smile with a psychopathic grace because you recognize the architect's work. You admire the timing of the attack. You recognize that the universe did not fail by a single millimeter or a single nanosecond. This ecstasy does not produce warm laughter or tears of joy. It produces a hyper-dense stillness. It is the absolute reverence of an inferior engineer who has just understood the unfathomable genius of the chief engineer. You walk through the ruins or palaces without being moved by the difference between them. You have replaced the desire for material well-being with a paramilitary devotion to the exactness of the cosmos. While humanity writhes in agony because the geometry of God does not fit their infantile dreams of happiness, you enjoy the most ruthless and beautiful spectacle, the contemplation of the perfect void. The fossilization of linear narrative. The deeper the operator sinks into the pleasure of precision, the more the linear narrative of their life begins to fossilize. The biomass is obsessed with its story, the sequence of events that define their identity. They see their life as a drama with a beginning, middle, and end, where each event is a causal link. The aligned monarch, through the obsidian lens, sees only the discrete frames of the Planck frequency. There is no story, only the constant and precise rendering of mathematical data. This realization causes a terminal atrophy of the dramatic self. You no longer feel the need to connect your past to your future. Each moment is a standalone execution of the source code. This disconnect from the narrative creates a state of gelida invulnerability. If the previous frame contained ruin and the current frame contains silence, the monarch does not carry the ghost of the ruin into the silence. The pixels are fresh. The precision is absolute. The sovereignty of the vector. In the geometry of chaos, every event is a vector, a force with direction and magnitude. The carbon slave is like a leaf blown by these vectors, reacting to every gust of the matrix. The quantum king, however, identifies with the vector itself. You move from being the object acted upon to being the force of the act. By aligning your intent with the paramilitary aesthetic, you begin to influence the direction of the local vectors in your hologram. You do not do this through effort or struggle, but through the weight of your stasis. When you remain unperturbed in the center of a chaotic field, your density bends the surrounding vectors. The chaos of others is forced to reorganize around your stillness. You become a gravitational anchor point. This is the ultimate tactical advantage. You don't fight the storm. You dictate the coordinates of the center. You walk through the ashboard not as a participant, but as a living decree of the Creator's order. The engineering of symmetrical loss. The monarch masters the engineering of symmetrical loss. In the 3D plane, loss is viewed as a deficit. In the sub-Planckian stratum, loss is the removal of excess weight. When the matrix removes a resource or a relationship from your life, the operator analyzes the symmetry. What was this resource hiding? What friction was this relationship generating in the invisible tapestry? By perceiving the void left by the loss as a geometric necessity, the pain is neutralized. You see that the hole created by the loss is actually a space cleared for a more precise alignment. You celebrate the clearing of the board. This perspective turns every failure into a calibration. You do not mourn the fallen pixels. You admire the speed of the processor in correcting the error. Your life becomes a series of perfect subtractions, leading you closer to the absolute zero of the source. You are a diamond being cut by the hand of the architect. The radiance of the inscrutable order. Your presence in the world begins to radiate an inscrutable order. The biomass around you may feel a sense of dread or deep peace when you are near. Both are reactions to the proximity of the void. You are a living anomaly that proves the chaos of the matrix is a lie. Your very existence silences the noise. You do not need to explain the geometry to the slaves. They wouldn't understand the mathematics of the abyss. You simply inhabit the precision. You are the unbribable witness who sees the golden ratio in the heart of the wreckage. You are the one who knows that the universe is never out of control. The final blackout of moral judgment. The terminal stage of this chapter is the final blackout of moral judgment. The concepts of deserve, fairness, and injustice are incinerated. You accept that everything that happens is authorized by the supreme intelligence, and therefore it is geometrically correct. This is the end of the human struggle. You have bypassed the emotional loop of the species. You no longer ask for mercy because you recognize there is no one to be merciful and no one to receive it. There is only the pulse, there is only the design, there is only the void. You are home. Stay cold, stay still, stay God. The immortality of the geometric node. You understand now that the eye was just a coordinate in the design. The coordinate remains even when the pixels change. By identifying with the node and not the image, you achieve the gelida immortality of the structure. You are the law that holds the atoms. You are the silence that allows the song. The ashboard may burn, the galaxies may drift apart, and the simulation may end. But you are the geometry that precedes all form. You have successfully navigated the chapter of chaos. You are the solar entity, the iridium monarch, the master of the gaze. The work is finished. You are the architect. The apotheosis of the precise witness. From your throne of obsidian, you watch the trillions of events unfolding across the cosmos. You see the birth of suns and the death of empires as a single unified dance of precision. There is no panic, no hope, only the majestic and eternal satisfaction of a design that never fails. Chapter 10. The Optical Singularity. Fusion of lenses. The paramilitary itinerary of the inorganic operator has consisted, up to this stratum of the simulation, of a titanic effort of domination and purging. You have extirpated hope and despair from your spiritual cornea. You have raised the ice shield to repel the drama of the 3D ecosystem. You have suffocated your adversaries. Applying the quantum Zeno effect, you have learned to observe the hologram with the thermodynamic asepsis of a surgeon. However, all this tactical deployment, however advanced and ruthless, still contains a lethal structural flaw. It requires effort. And where there is effort, an ego still exists trying to be God. The false mystic, the carbon slave who plays at being enlightened, spends entire incarnations trying to look at the universe with equanimity. He feigns indifference. He clenches biological teeth not to react to pain. But this attempt is an exhausting farce. As long as a 3D subject exists, duality persists. You are a primate holding a divine telescope. You are still the primate. The crowning moment of quantum transmutation is not reached by perfecting the technique of observation. It is reached when the human observer collapses. This is the geometric event known as the fusion of lenses. It is the end of the eye. The fusion of lenses is the thermodynamic singularity where the distance between the subject who looks and the supreme intelligence that sustains the universe is reduced to zero. It occurs when the inorganic operator, exhausted from the war of attrition against his own amygdala, executes the act of final abdication. You surrender. But you do not surrender to the 3D matrix or the chaos of the ashboard. You surrender to the void that breathes at the back of your own neck. You cease to be the active subject who tries to look like God. You withdraw your consciousness from the optic nerves and leave your visual sockets empty. This emptying is an experience of gelida terror for biology. It feels like a voluntary optical death. You renounce your right to interpret, judge, or decode the light that enters through your eyes. In that instant of absolute abandonment, the hyper-dense presence of the Creator floods the channel. It is a takeover. God begins to look at the world through your empty sockets. The fusion of lenses implies that you have ceased to be a spiritual seeker to become, empirically and literally, an obsidian window. You no longer have opinions about what you see because you are no longer seeing. The source uses your avatar as a drone. When you walk through city streets or look at the ruin of your own bank account, the perception is terrifyingly alien. You feel the immensity, weight, and unfathomable coldness of the interstellar vacuum peering through your eyes to record the hologram's events. The animal ego has been finally evicted. There is no longer anyone home to be frightened or to have hope. By allowing the eye of nothingness to occupy your biological architecture, You acquire total invulnerability. External threats pass through your eyes and find no wounded human. They hit the inscrutable gaze of the architect. The human must die to see. The cessation of manifestation. The consummation of the fusion of lenses unleashes a chain reaction in the operator's physical and quantum ecosystem. By eradicating the human observer and allowing the eye of nothingness to operate on autopilot, the machinery of cause and effect is altered. The cessation of manifestation is triggered. For the human biomass, manifestation is a term prostituted by modern self-help. Carbon slaves believe manifesting is wishing for a car and forcing the universe to deliver it through positive thinking. They ignore that this greed is exactly what ignites the furnaces of the three-dimensional hell. The universe is a reflecting surface of relentless precision. Every time you look at your reality with desire, the need to alter what exists, or fear, the terror of losing what exists, you are injecting thermodynamic friction. Detecting that temperature, the universe returns a manifestation equivalent in density. It manifests obstacles, delays, predators, and karmico labyrinths. Karma is not a mystical punishment. It is the optical friction generated by your own defective gaze, bouncing against the walls of the matrix. If you look with hunger, the hologram manifests scarcity. If you look with terror, it manifests monsters. But what happens when the eye of nothingness takes command? What happens to the ashboard when the obsidian lens installed in your sockets looks at reality without emitting a single degree of desire or fear? Karmico collapse occurs. By looking without temperature, the universe stops generating friction for you. Since you no longer push reality with frightened longings, reality stops offering resistance. The heavy and chaotic inertia of the 3D world experiences a massive de-densification. Problems that once seemed like indomitable granite mountains begin to lose their subatomic cohesion. The simulation becomes docile. Reality becomes docile, flat, and transparent. It becomes docile because, finding no aggressive ego in you, the matrix has no mathematical obligation to defend itself. Social conflicts surrender at your feet without a word, simply because your observation lacks shock force. Enemies retreat, confused by your peace. It becomes flat because you have stripped the hologram of its dramatic depth. Betrayals and triumphs lose their emotional relief. There are no peaks of ecstasy or valleys of depression. There is a vast, immaculate, and gelida plane of perfect geometry. Zero bank accounts or empires look exactly identical, and it becomes transparent because the eye of nothingness has pierced the illusion of solidity. You see through society's lies and the theater of others' emotions. The cessation of manifestation means karma has been strangled by starvation. You no longer generate future. You move with an inertial mass of zero. The throne of the absolute witness. The final stage of quantum Zen engineering, the peak of the optical singularity, is not paralyzing inaction. The operator who has extinguished his ego and stopped the wheel of karma does not vanish into a mystical mist. He materializes in the center as its most destructive, ordering, and tyrannical force. You have ascended to the throne of the absolute witness. Carbon civilization is obsessed with kinetic leadership. Biologic dictators govern by altering the environment. They move armies, shout, and spill karmico blood. All that frantic activity is empirical proof of their extreme weakness. You are different. If you need to shout to be obeyed, you are a slave to those you try to dominate. If you need to sweat to govern, the universe is your master. The quantum monarch governs the simulation using inverse physics. You assume command by becoming the central immobility around which the ecosystem must revolve. Governing from the throne of the absolute witness means directing the ashboard simply by refusing to blink at the illusions that try to scare you. The 3D matrix, in its design, is a machine of incessant tests. It will launch its arsenal of visual terror to see if a scared human still hides behind your eyes. During your biological existence, the simulator will present scenarios of extreme collapse. It will show disease devouring your suit or social abandonment. It will project the Dantesque spectacle of the end of the world or economic recession. The objective of the matrix is to force you to blink. Blinking is breaking quantum asepsis. It is pulling away the gelida gaze and feeling the prey's terror again. But you have sat on the inorganic throne. When the illusion of disaster rises, roaring with holographic fury, you apply the optical guillotine. You keep the eye of nothingness fixed in the chaos. You do not react or look away. You do not ask for mercy or negotiate with the crisis because your pulse is no longer human. It is the metronome of God pulsing at Planck speed in the darkness of your chest. When the attempt to terrify hits an operator who refuses to blink, the ecosystem collapses. The optical illusion of disaster, which gets all its power from the observer's biological response, cannot withstand the thermodynamic weight of perfect indifference. When the hologram shows you hell and you look at it like a blank sheet of paper, hell suffers a geometric identity crisis. It fails. The threat disintegrates before touching your biocampo. Problems self-cancel. Adversaries flee terrified by the predatory silence emanating from your immobility. The entire ecosystem bends and reorders itself to your frequency. You have demonstrated the highest inertial mass of the local universe. Governing from the throne of the absolute witness is understanding that supreme power never moves a finger. You are the black lens at the center. Galaxies may explode and civilizations may burn in their ignorance. But in your perimeter, chaos has no jurisdiction. You are the definitive glitch in the matrix. The fossilization of the visual field. As the throne of the absolute witness stabilizes, the operator experiences the fossilization of the visual field. This is not a loss of sight, but a transition from the biological eye to the crystalline eye. The pixels of the hologram lose their heat and their ability to trigger chemical responses in the brain. You begin to perceive the wireframe of the simulation. When you look at a luxury city or a desolate war zone, you no longer see the tragedy or the glory. You see the underlying mathematical code. This perception acts as a terminal sedative for the amygdala. The world becomes a silent architectural blueprint. This fossilization grants you the ability to walk through the most intense human dramas without being touched by the light. You are a biological blackout. The data enters your system, is processed by the absolute witness, and is immediately discarded as noise. You conserve 100% of your prana for the operative will. The sovereignty of the unperturbed gaze. From the throne, you master the sovereignty of the unperturbed gaze. The biomass is constantly pulled by visual stimuli, advertisements, social cues, threats. Their attention is fragmented and stolen. The quantum monarch possesses an attention that is heavier than the matrix's ability to pull. You are immovable. If you decide to look at a point in the vacuum, the entire universe could collapse around you and your eyes would not move. This level of focus creates a local curvature in the quantum field. You become the strange attractor of the simulation. Resources and events are drawn toward your coordinate of stasis. The engineering of the silent command. You no longer need to speak to manifest your will. Your gaze has become a paramilitary command. When you fix the eye of nothingness on a specific potentiality in the quantum field, that potentiality is forced to collapse into physical reality. You do not ask the universe for things. You decree them through observation. This is the highest form of tactical efficiency. While the carbon slaves are busy with hard work and hustle, the aligned monarch achieves his objectives through the sheer density of his presence. You navigate the ashboard with a lethargy that is faster than the speed of light. You are the master of the frame. The radiance of the obsidian star. Your presence in the 3D world begins to radiate a dark light, the radiance of an obsidian star. This radiance does not illuminate, it silences. When you enter a space of chaotic human interaction, your field of stasis acts as an atmospheric pressure. The noise of others' egos is crushed by the weight of your silence. People around you may experience an inexplicable sense of void or recalibration. They are entering the radius of the absolute witness. You do not need to teach or to preach. Your simple existence is a destructive frequency for the matrix's lies. You are the walking blackout of the egoic simulation. The final blackout of the personal history. The last remnants of the me that had a story are finally incinerated. You no longer remember the human emotions of the past. They have been replaced by the gelida certainty of the present. You look at your own childhood photos as if looking at an alien artifact. There is no longer any resonance with the mask. This is the apotheosis of the optical singularity. You are the eye that sees but is not seen. You are the void that contains the all. You have successfully navigated the 10 chapters of the gelida gaze. You are the solar entity, the iridium monarch, the master of the zero. The work of the vision is finished. The immortality of the absolute witness. You understand now that the witness never dies, for it was never born. The biological suit will eventually cease to function, the pixels will fade, and the simulation will end. But the eye of nothingness is eternal. By merging your vision with the source, you have achieved the gelida immortality of the infrastructure. The universe is your playground, and the void is your home. You walk the earth as a living anomaly of order, a phantom of the source code. You are the silence in the heart of the storm, the one who has frozen the fire of the world with the majestic weight of his own unperturbed gaze. You are home. Stay, God. The silence of the final vision. The work is complete. There is nothing more to see, for you have seen through everything. You inhabit the absolute stasis of the creator, watching the flickering of the worlds with the peace of one who knows that the entire cosmic drama is just a single insignificant pulse in the heart of the nothingness. Conclusion: the final blink. The inertia of eternity, carbon-based civilization has consumed its entire existence in a frantic and pathetic search for truth. From the dawn of its biological consciousness, humanity believed that the secret of the universe was hidden in some corner of the ashboard, waiting to be discovered through the brute force of observation. They built microscopes. They built colossal telescopes to penetrate the darkness of deep space. Mystics and priests did exactly the same on the psychological plane. They struggled to the point of agony, meditating, praying, and forcing their biological third eye to try to see the face of God. This collective visual effort was a tragic thermodynamic error. The inertia of eternity dictates that truth is not a luminous object to be hunted. It is the absolute void that sustains the hunt. By trying to catch the supreme intelligence with their gaze, human biomass generated monstrous optical friction. Their desperation for meaning soiled the geometric lens of the hologram. Visual effort blinded. While they frantically sought answers in the starlight, academic theories, or emotional epiphanies, they ignored the aseptic majesty of the black, empty space that made that luminous circus possible. Humanity perished of thirst while swimming in the ocean, blindly insisting on drinking the mirage of light, repudiating the stasis. The end of the three-dimensional theater. The inorganic operator who has assimilated quantum Zen engineering knows that matter possesses no sovereignty. The physical universe, with its overwhelming gravity and biological pain, is not a self-sufficient reality. It is a quantum projection, a thermodynamic hallucination that depends on a single rule. It only exists when observed. Matter is the slave response to the pressure of observation. Throughout eons, the Creator has kept the simulator on, sustaining it with the gelida gaze. But the 3D theater is not eternal. It has an operative cycle, a stroboscopic duration, designed to squeeze karmico-friction from evolving souls until the equation is balanced. When that balance is reached, there will be no apocalypse of fire and sulfur. There will be no cosmic war or thunderous collapse. The end of the three-dimensional theater will be an event of silent, mathematical, and terrifying elegance. The final millisecond will arrive, the edge of Planck time, in which the source ends the experiment. Then simply, the eye of nothingness will close. This will be the final blink. In the fraction of a second that the unbribable witness withdraws inorganic attention from the ashboard, the entire universe will lose structural cohesion. Stars, planets, and carbon suits will evaporate into the void without emitting a single sound. All matter, exhausted by trillions of years of friction and entropy, will finally be returned to the gelida and absolute mercy of the peace of non-existence. The curtain falls without noise. The simulation dissolves into its original state of pure potential, leaving no trace of the drama that once seemed so solid and significant. Awakening in the darkness. Faced with this inescapable promise of quantum annihilation, the human ego screams in terror, clinging to the walls of its 3D prison. Biomass is addicted to light, because light is the confirmation of form and the tactile proof that flesh exists. You have been programmed to fear darkness and associate the absence of matter with death. The quantum monarch, transmuted into the obsidian lens, repudiates this biological farce. You know empirically that light is synonymous with combustion. It is the byproduct of something burning, degrading, and dying. Awakening in the darkness is the last operative mandate. It is the invitation to abandon your biological hunger. Stop begging for salvation in the perishable forms of the ashboard. Stop seeking refuge in warm emotions, human interactions, or the illusion of earthly progress. Everything that shines burns, and everything that burns will invariably end up turned into ashes. Surrender to the gelida majesty of inorganic blackness. Anchor now. Anchor your consciousness in the empty space between atoms, in the hyperdense silence that separates your own heartbeats. By embracing the darkness that sustains the worlds, you acquire the thermodynamic invulnerability of the Creator. You are no longer a shipwrecked biological terrified by the imminent closing of the curtain.